My husband shoved me out of the car in the pouring rain, 40 miles from home, and said coldly, "You need to learn a lesson." The gravel cut into my palms as I stumbled, his taillights vanishing into the storm. To him, this was power. To me, it was proof. For months, I had smiled through insults, played the obedient wife, while secretly documenting every betrayal, every dollar he stole, every touch he gave another woman. And tonight, as the black truck pulled up and my bodyguard stepped out, I realized Richard hadn't punished me. He had freed me. When Richard and I first moved into the Hayes estate, people called us the perfect couple. Our wedding photographs were printed in glossy magazines. My hand looped delicately through his arm, my smile so bright it nearly blinded me. The mansion stood like a monument to success. White columns, manicured gardens, cars polished to a mirror's gleam. On weekends, there were parties, champagne towers, string quartets, women in designer gowns whispering how lucky I was. I convinced myself I was lucky too. After all, hadn't I married into everything my modest childhood couldn't offer? But luck has a way of peeling, layer by layer, until you see the rot underneath. It began with his words, not the grand speeches, not the charming introductions at galas, but the smaller ones, dropped like tiny shards of glass that embedded in my skin. "You wouldn't make a dime without me, Madeline." He said it lightly, almost playfully, his lips brushing my ear at a charity dinner. I laughed then, because what else could I do with 50 eyes on us? But my stomach had twisted, and when I caught my reflection in the mirror across the ballroom, my smile looked like a wound. Soon, he insisted on holding my credit cards. "It's easier if I manage our finances," Richard told me, sliding my purse back into my hands as if he were being generous. At first, I believed him. He was older, experienced, successful. But the truth was clear. He was building a cage, bar by bar, gilded enough that outsiders wouldn't see it. I noticed how often I had to ask for permission to buy something simple, shoes for work, books I loved. Each time, he smirked like I was a child asking for candy. His family joined in the chorus. The Hayes name carried weight, and they knew it. His mother would smile with perfect red lips and say, "Richard could have married into any society family. He saw something in you, darling, though God knows what." His sister-in-law once asked in front of dinner guests if I had ever owned a dress worth more than $50 before Richard. Laughter bubbled around the table like champagne, and I wanted to vanish into the linen. My background, middle class, unpolished, was their favorite weapon. I endured it, telling myself love outweighed humiliation. But the balance was tipping, and my heart knew it before my mind dared admit it. One night, long after the parties ended and the house stood silent, I awoke to the low murmur of Richard's voice. He was in the study, phone pressed tight to his ear. His tone was hushed, urgent, almost tender. I held my breath in the hallway, straining to catch words. I couldn't make them out, but I knew. It wasn't business. His shoulders slumped when he spoke, a softness reserved for no one in this house, least of all me. He didn't notice me watching. When he hung up, he exhaled a laugh, a private laugh that froze my blood. That was the night I began to write things down. I kept a notebook hidden beneath loose floorboards in my closet. Every word, every slight, every strange movement. I recorded them. I became my own witness. The numbers didn't lie either. While he insisted every cent was accounted for, I noticed transfers between accounts, money dripping into places I wasn't meant to see. One evening, while searching through his desk for my passport, I stumbled across a file carelessly left open. Bank statements, transactions labeled with codes I didn't recognize. It wasn't the money itself that made me dizzy. It was the secrecy, the slush fund, his private empire built on betrayal. Then came the moment that nearly shattered me. I was pressing one of his suits for a gala when I noticed a single hair on the lapel. Blonde, long, and delicate. My hair is dark. I lifted it gently, like it might burn me. It was evidence, thin as a whisper but undeniable. The room spun. My chest caved as if all the air had been stolen. I wanted to scream, to march into his office and hurl the truth at him. But I didn't. Instead, I slipped the hair into a small envelope and placed it in the notebook. My hands shook, but my mind was steady. That night, I sat alone in the music room, the one with the grand piano no one ever touched. I put on an old record I used to love in college, back when life was simple, when I had believed in things like freedom and laughter. The melody wrapped around me, fragile and aching. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not because I was weak, but because I remembered who I used to be before the Hayes mansion swallowed me whole. By the time the song ended, I knew. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't hysterical. I wasn't wrong. Richard was betraying me in ways deeper than I had ever feared. I took a photo of the suit with the hair still clinging to it, storing it away like a secret bullet. Someday, it would fire. Someday, he would bleed from it. I didn't know yet who the woman was, but I would find out. And when I did, it wouldn't just be Richard who fell. The photograph of the blonde hair remained hidden in my notebook, but it weighed on me like a stone. I knew suspicion was no longer enough. I needed proof so undeniable that no amount of charm or manipulation could erase it. Richard thrived on appearances. If I could strip those away, the empire he built would collapse. I decided I would stop being only a witness. I would become the architect of his downfall. The first step was hiring someone who could move unseen. I reached out discreetly to a private security firm, pretending it was about a business client harassing me. The man assigned to me introduced himself simply as Cole. To the household, he was just another delivery driver who happened to linger too long at the gates. To me, he was eyes and ears in places I could never reach. His presence alone gave me a thread of confidence. I supplemented his work with my own. I found an old phone, wiped clean, that I used only for gathering evidence. It became my secret weapon. I snapped photos of bank statements, took voice recordings when Richard snapped at me in private, saved every message where he tried to gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind. The phone stayed hidden inside a hollowed-out book in my study, an old copy of Jane Eyre. No one had touched it in years. The danger thrilled and terrified me. Once, Richard nearly caught me with the phone in my hand as he walked into the bedroom. My pulse leapt so violently I thought he could hear it. I smiled, asked him about his meeting, and slid the phone under a pillow with a grace that came only from desperation. Another time, while searching his briefcase, I dropped a paperclip and froze when I heard his footsteps down the hall. I held my breath until he passed by without noticing. Each close call sharpened my resolve. Fear was no longer my enemy. It was my compass. The most damning moment came late one night when I crept down the stairs and pressed my ear against the door of his office. His voice was low, strained, but clear. "No one will ever believe her." The words knifed through me, but instead of breaking, they solidified everything. Richard had built his fortress on the assumption that I was voiceless. He had no idea I was already sharpening the blade of my voice in silence. I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed allies. So I began weaving a network, thread by thread. I found an attorney recommended quietly by a colleague, a woman known for tearing apart powerful men in courtrooms. Her name was Evelyn Sharp, and when I laid my trembling notes before her, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're not crazy, you're careful, and that's the difference that will save you." I reached out to Julia, my closest friend from college, now a journalist who'd made a name for herself exposing corruption. At first, shame burned in my throat as I told her the truth, but she only took my hands and whispered, "Maddie, you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Even my therapist became part of the plan. For months, I had poured my tears into her office. Now, I also gave her context, the patterns of abuse, the careful manipulations. She told me documenting everything wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Meanwhile, I began building a secret financial cushion. At night, while Richard slept, I worked on freelance architectural designs under a pseudonym, sending them to small firms. Each payment, small though it was, trickled into an account he didn't know existed. Every dollar felt like a brick in the foundation of my eventual escape. Cole, the man who posed as a delivery driver, began feeding me reports. "He meets someone regularly," he said one evening, his voice steady, professional. "A young woman. Upscale hotels, never the same one twice. I didn't breathe for a moment. Proof was one thing, but confirmation of another person turned my veins to ice. The first time I followed at a distance, my hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The hotel glowed with opulence, glass chandeliers spilling golden light onto velvet carpets. From across the street, I watched as Richard appeared at the entrance. Beside him was a woman, slim, blonde, her arm brushing his as if it belonged there. They leaned toward each other, laughing in the way he used to laugh only with me. Then Cole leaned closer and whispered the truth that sliced deeper than I could bear. Her name is Chloe Hayes, his cousin. The world tilted and I gripped the lamppost for balance. Chloe, family. A betrayal not just of marriage, but of blood. The shame would be devastating if it came to light, which meant the leverage was stronger than I had ever dreamed. I raised my phone and captured the moment, their hands intertwining as they disappeared through the glass doors of the hotel. My heart didn't shatter. It hardened. I lowered the phone, slipped it into my coat, and stared at the glowing letters above the hotel entrance. My lips curled into a bitter smile. Richard believed no one would ever believe me. He was wrong. I was done being his silent shadow. The story was already writing itself. And when it ended, it wouldn't be me left in the rain. Every evening felt like walking into a theater where I had been cast in the wrong play. The Hayes dining room gleamed with silver and crystal. Richard at the head of the table, his family gathered like loyal courtiers. They toasted to success, to the empire Richard claimed as his own, to appearances so flawless no one dared scratch the surface. And there I was, smiling as though I belonged, though I knew the truth gnawed beneath the tablecloth. Each laugh I forced felt like swallowing glass. Richard's hand would sometimes rest on mine, his touch a performance for his family. Inside, my skin crawled. I wanted to rip my hand away, to scream in his face, to shout the names and hotels I now carried like weapons. But instead, I smiled. I lifted my glass. I nodded as if grateful. My heart whispered rebellion, but my lips played the docile wife. There were moments when rage threatened to consume me whole. I would stand in the bathroom afterward, gripping the marble sink, my reflection fractured in the gilded mirror. Words boiled in my throat, begging for release. Liar, cheat, coward. And yet, I would whisper the same two words over and over, grounding myself in their steel. Not yet. Patience was not surrender. It was strategy. On Thursdays, I visited my therapist. Dr. Harper's office smelled of lavender and rain-soaked pages, a place where time slowed enough for me to breathe. There, I let the mask fall. My voice broke as I spoke of my parents, gone too soon, their absence a hollow ache. They would never see the battles I fought, never remind me of my worth. Tears spilled as I confessed how much I missed being someone's daughter, not someone's prisoner. Dr. Harper handed me tissues and said softly, "Grief is love with nowhere to go, but you are giving it a place, here, in truth, in strength." For an hour each week, I wasn't a strategist. I was just Madeline, broken but alive. Then Evelyn, my lawyer, called one evening. I stepped into the garden, the phone pressed tight, my chest hammering. "We have enough to destroy him," she said, her voice steady with certainty. My knees nearly buckled. The weight of months of secrecy shifted. Proof, solid as stone, stood behind me now. For a fleeting second, I imagined it all ending the next morning, Richard exposed, his empire crumbling. But I breathed in, exhaled slow, and whispered, "Not yet." Timing was everything, so I studied them instead. Richard was addicted to his own reflection. At every gala, every board meeting, he basked in attention, feeding on admiration like oxygen. His greatest fear wasn't losing money, it was losing face. The slush fund was his hidden fortress, but his pride was the fragile glass tower that held it. I watched how he bragged about his deals, how he relished the whispers of envy from his peers. If I took away the respect he craved, he would collapse long before the courts finished with him. And then there was Chloe. Beautiful, ambitious, venom wrapped in silk. I had seen the way she looked at Richard, not with love, but with hunger, as though she could swallow the Hayes fortune whole if only she sat at his side as his wife. Her betrayal was colder than his. She was blood, yet she chose greed. I observed her carefully, the way she leaned too close at dinners, the way she pretended not to notice me. She knew I existed, of course she did, but in her eyes, I was already erased, a placeholder to be discarded. The truth landed hard. Chloe didn't just want Richard, she wanted my life. My place at the table, my signature on the mansion's doors, the respect my presence reluctantly commanded. She was rehearsing for the role of Mrs. Hayes as if my part in the play was already over. One evening, as I sifted through photographs I'd collected, my phone vibrated with a new message. No name, no number, just words that slithered across the screen. Leave him, or I'll ruin you. My breath caught, the world narrowing to those letters. I read them again, the bile rising in my throat. The threat wasn't Richard's voice, it was hers. Chloe was no longer hiding behind shadows. She was stepping into the arena, daring me to retreat. I stared at the message, the glow of the screen burning into my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile. She thought fear would break me. She didn't know that fear had already turned into fuel. The night it all shifted, the rain fell in sheets so heavy it blurred the world into a smear of shadows and headlights. Richard slammed the brakes, his hands gripping the wheel like he was strangling it. Before I could speak, he leaned across, unlatched the passenger door, and shoved it open. "You need to learn a lesson," he spat, his voice sharp as glass. The cold air and water rushed in, drenching me before I could even move. I stumbled onto the gravel shoulder, my heels sinking into mud, hair plastered to my face. I looked up just in time to see his taillights vanish into the storm. The echo of his cruelty was almost louder than the thunder. Alone, soaked, 40 miles from home. That was supposed to be my punishment, but it wasn't. Moments later, beams of white light cut through the downpour. A black truck slowed beside me, window rolling down to reveal Cole's steady gaze. My lips trembled into a smile, and I whispered the words that had burned inside me for months. "It's time." Cole drove me to Evelyn's office. The lawyer had been waiting, folders stacked on her desk like ammunition. She slid one open, page after page of photographs, statements, transactions. My notebook, my recordings, my fear turned into firepower. Evelyn looked me dead in the eye. "Tomorrow, we launch the first strike." For the first time, my shoulders loosened. The waiting was over. The morning dawned gray, but steady. Papers were filed at the courthouse. Our first official move. The lawsuit named Richard Hayes in bold black ink, accusing him of financial fraud, marital misconduct, and psychological abuse. Evelyn's hand pressed mine, firm and unyielding, as the clerk stamped the documents. The sound was like a gavel already striking. That afternoon, Julia did her part. My old friend had promised to tread carefully, but careful was never her style. On her news site appeared a grainy photo. Richard stepping into a hotel, Chloe Hayes clinging to his arm. The caption asked no questions. It stated facts. Hayes' heir spotted in compromising situation with cousin. The story spread like wildfire, whispered first in corporate lounges, then shouted across social media. By evening, my phone buzzed relentlessly with calls I didn't answer, but I knew the storm had hit the Hayes estate. I could picture them, his mother clutching pearls in horror, his siblings exchanging frantic phone calls, their perfect family mask cracking. Richard's voice surely thundered through the halls, demanding silence, demanding loyalty. The twist came sooner than I expected. Evelyn called me just after midnight, her tone tinged with something like satisfaction. "His mother reached out," she said. "She's unsettled, wants to know if the rumors are true." I sank into my chair, stunned. The woman who had despised me from the start, who had mocked my upbringing at every turn, was now doubting her own son. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, and Richard was tasting the edge of it. Still, the fight had only begun. 2 days later, Richard stormed into our home, slamming doors, shouting about conspiracies. He demanded to know if I was behind the leak. I looked at him calmly, my heart pounding, and simply said, "You think too highly of yourself?" He roared, but I could see the cracks spreading. He knew the world was watching, and that was worse than anything I could say. That night, Evelyn revealed the next blow. With the evidence we'd gathered, the court approved an emergency motion. The Hayes accounts, our accounts, were frozen pending investigation. Richard's empire, his pride, his untouchable power had been shackled overnight. I almost laughed at the irony. For years, he'd controlled my every purchase, every dollar, every breath of financial freedom. Now, he was the one locked out of his fortune. When the phone call reached him, I saw it in his eyes. The color drained from his face, his jaw clenched until his teeth nearly cracked. He slammed the receiver down, splintering wood, then turned to me with a glare that tried to burn. "This isn't over," he growled, but I didn't flinch. For once, his rage didn't pierce me, because in my chest I was already certain the game had begun, and the king had just been cornered. Richard did not crumble quietly. The moment his accounts were frozen, he lashed out like a cornered animal, clawing for survival with the only weapons he knew: money and influence. Within days, whispers about me began to circulate, carefully planted in glossy magazines and on gossip sites. Headlines described me as unstable, unfit, manipulative. One article even claimed I was undergoing psychiatric treatment, twisting my therapy sessions into evidence of mental breakdowns. I recognized his fingerprints in every line. Richard wasn't defending himself. He was trying to erase me. Then Chloe stepped forward, draped in sorrow like it was designer silk. In interviews, she painted herself as the victim, a woman seduced and betrayed by a man who had lied to both of us. "I didn't know," she wept, lashes damp with crocodile tears. "Richard told me his marriage was over." Her voice quivered on television screens, while her hand clutched a tissue too delicately to be real. To the outside world, she was the wounded dove. To me, she was the viper I had already seen coiled around him. The Hayes family fractured under the weight of scandal. His mother called me once, her tone brittle, asking if I was behind the photographs. I didn't answer directly, only said, "You've always known what he's capable of." Silence hung heavy before she ended the call. Some cousins defended Richard fiercely, dismissing everything as fabrications. Others stayed quiet, their silence an admission of doubt. The empire was no longer unified. Cracks spread like spiderwebs across their fortress of reputation. But Richard wasn't finished. He appeared on business channels, jaw tight, voice booming, accusing me of betrayal. He called me unstable and vindictive, a woman incapable of reason. He painted himself as the devoted husband, caught in the snares of a jealous wife. Watching him perform was almost surreal, knowing what evidence lay hidden in my hands. His performance convinced some, but not all. Then the internet delivered what neither Evelyn nor I could have orchestrated: truth unfiltered. A video surfaced, grainy but clear enough. Richard, drunk and red-faced, shouting at his own mother in a crowded restaurant. His words slurred, venomous. "You made me. Without me, you're nothing." Gasps could be heard in the background as diners recorded. The clips spread like wildfire, and for the first time, people began to see not the polished air, but the tyrant beneath. I knew the timing was perfect. Evelyn agreed. "Strike now," she urged, her eyes glinting. We released the next wave. Documents exposing the slush fund. Transfers, offshore accounts, embezzlement traced directly to Richard's business dealings. It wasn't just marital betrayal anymore. It was corporate crime. Evelyn held a press conference, her voice steady as she presented the files. Reporters devoured every word. Richard's empire didn't just look tarnished, it looked criminal. And Chloe? She couldn't withstand the heat. At first, she denied everything, swearing she was just another victim. But when investigators turned their gaze toward her bank records, her resolve shattered. Late one night, Evelyn called to tell me the twist I hadn't expected. "Chloe's flipped," she said. "She's giving them everything. To save herself, she's burying him." I sat in silence, processing. The woman who had threatened to ruin me was now Richard's undoing. Betrayal was their shared language, and in the end, it was him she betrayed. The press changed course almost overnight. Stories about my supposed instability vanished under the avalanche of corruption reports. Commentators labeled me courageous, resilient. Social media filled with messages of support, strangers rallying behind the woman who dared to stand up to a Hayes. The narrative had shifted, and for once, it bent in my favor. But the true blow landed a week later. Richard, still clinging to scraps of control, was served with a subpoena. The document was delivered in broad daylight, in front of cameras that had been tipped off. He snatched the papers, face contorted in rage, but the damage was done. His empire wasn't merely crumbling, it was collapsing in full view of the world. I watched the footage from my living room, my breath steady, my hands calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like prey. Richard Hayes, the man who had left me in the rain, was now drowning in a storm of his own making, and this time there would be no one to pull him out. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and judgment. Reporters filled the benches, pens scratching, cameras flashing each time the door creaked. I sat behind Evelyn, my hands folded tightly in my lap, every breath deliberate. Across the aisle, Richard looked like a shadow of the man who once commanded rooms with a smile. His suit sagged at the shoulders, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched as if holding back the inevitable. When the evidence began to pour out, there was no pause, no mercy. Bank statements, recordings, photographs, layer upon layer of betrayal made visible. Evelyn presented it like a tapestry, each thread undeniable. Richard tried to object, his lawyers rising with practiced outrage, but the judge silenced them with a single raised hand. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her tone firm, "these records speak louder than words." The turning point came when Chloe took the stand. She entered in a dark suit, hair tied back, her face pale but resolute. Richard's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. For months, she had been his accomplice, his secret, his shield. Now, she was his executioner. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she described the money transfers, the lies, the threats. "I thought I could gain from him," she admitted, eyes fixed on the jury. "But he would have destroyed me too." Gasps rippled through the room. Richard's head dropped into his hands. His family could not bear it. One by one, they left the courtroom, his mother in silence, his siblings with tight jaws and lowered eyes. The empire of loyalty he had built crumbled, not with a bang, but with the slow, deliberate act of turning away. He sat alone, surrounded by the rubble of his legacy. When the judge read the ruling, her voice carried like a verdict for more than just him. Guilty of fraud, guilty of misconduct, guilty of betrayal too severe to mask. Richard Hayes slumped forward, shoulders sagging, his lips forming words no one else could hear. But I caught them. His eyes met mine, and he whispered almost reverently, "She planned it all along." I looked at him one last time, not with hatred, not with rage, but with the clarity of a woman finally unchained. His destruction no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the truth. I stood as they led him away, my chest rising not with triumph, but with release. The next morning, I walked out of the courthouse wearing white. The dress was simple, elegant, a symbol of everything he had tried to strip from me but couldn't. The press swarmed, microphones flashing, voices calling me the woman who would not bend. "Unbroken," one headline declared that afternoon. Another read, "The wife who fought back." Their words no longer frightened me. They were simply reflections of a story I had already lived. I returned to the life he had tried to steal, but not as the same woman. Architecture, once a quiet passion tucked away in the shadows of his control, became my foundation. I opened my own firm, designing spaces for women who needed safety, who needed light. Each blueprint felt like reclaiming something lost, brick by brick, line by line. Cole stayed, no longer just a bodyguard. He became a friend, a steady presence, someone who understood the silence between words. He never asked for more, never pressed beyond the loyalty he had already shown. His presence reminded me that trust could exist without chains. And yet, there were nights when the noise of the world quieted, when I found myself sitting by the window, pen in hand, staring at the rain. I wrote in my journal, not for evidence, not for war, but for healing. One night, as thunder rolled distantly, I traced the words carefully onto the page. Justice was never about revenge. It was about freedom. I closed the book, exhaled deeply, and felt the weight of years lift. Outside, the city hummed with life, each light a reminder that endings are only beginnings wearing a different mask. My story was not about Richard anymore. It was about me, Madeline Carter, standing in the ruins of what tried to break me and building something new. Somewhere out there, storms still gathered and battles still brewed. But I had walked through the rain and found my strength on the other side. And this time, no one could take it from me.